Greetings, salutations, and welcome to another review of classic science fiction and fantasy. John Brunner, Web of Everywhere. I don't really know exactly where I got this book. I'm guessing it was at an op shop. It's in pretty good condition. The spine was virtually uncreased when I got it, and it's not much creased now. The pages are quite heavily oxidized, they're kind of biscuit coloured, but the book is actually in really good condition. And because it's a small book and it didn't live inside my backpacks or handbags for days, it's still in good condition. A while ago I decided I wanted to reread A Stand on Zanzibar, which is by John Brunner. It was the only book by John Brunner that I'd heard of. I haven't been able to get my hands on it, but I think that's how I ended up buying this one. I couldn't find the one I wanted, but I thought I'd read something else by him, see what it's like. Because I knew virtually nothing about the author, except that one book. It's been interesting reading about him. He's John Killian Houston Brunner, thank you Wikipedia. Born 1934, died in 1995. The Stand on Zanzibar, well, I won't talk about that one until I actually get it. But it sounds like he was a divisive author in his day. I don't think he was greatly liked, but he did write a lot of classic sci-fi and sci-fi, mostly. And he did win quite a few awards. From reading about him, it sounds like his career had two very distinct phases. He had an earlier one where he wrote conventional, what we'd call today space opera, but after Stand on Zanzibar, he seemed to start exploring common human themes a bit more deeply. And this one was first copyrighted 1974, though this is a New England edition. Yes, New English Library edition from 1980. It's an interesting little book. It wasn't what I expected. I was expecting space opera. A small book from the cover, which is very much of its era. I thought it'd be what you expect from space opera of the era. A manly man type hero, a bit of classic sci-fi. And it's not that. It's interesting. It's intriguing. I still don't quite know what I think about it. I've just finished it and I'm talking through it. I'd give it probably 3 out of 5 stars because, well, it was intriguing and it was different. I didn't love it. So it's so hard to actually get a grip on where to start with this review. Let's start with the Goodreads review, which has all the hallmarks of being written by someone who not only had never read this book and never planned to, and knew no one who had. In a society revolutionized by a device that lets you walk through a door and be anywhere in the world instantly. At a time when unauthorized travel has caused millions to die violent deaths. In a world where invasion of privacy is the ultimate crime. He is the visitor. Da 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 da. And it's utter BS. I've got no idea where The Visitor came from. Like I said, whoever wrote that and allowed it to be published probably had never read this book. It's an interesting, complex book in which certainly the main protagonist is deeply unlikable. I would argue that all the individual characters are deeply unlikable. There's a strange attitude to everything about it that I actually did quite enjoy and was quite intrigued by. So in chapter 1, in the first few pages, John Brunner actually tells us everything we need to know about this world, which is entirely new to me because I haven't read any of his other books. I don't know if he writes a lot within the same world, like Heinlein did, for example. But he introduces just enough of the world to place us in it quite deeply so we know everything that we need to go forward. It is a future world in which there's been nuclear warfare, there's been up to million pandemics by the sound of it. And there's been the invention of the door type device that lets you instantly go from anywhere in the world to anywhere else, and possibly the moon is the next frontier. There was a really good short story that I can't remember, which was about using doors with a small d, like the one to this room, or doors with a capital D that would instantly transplant you from your home to wherever else you were going. It's kind of like that. And so you've got a world that's been decimated of so many people that there just aren't that many people. People go long distances for the day, they go long distances for work. And the privacy of the code of their house is very much a very controlled secret. And invading that privacy comes with the penalty of having a bracelet put on you that will prevent you from transporting, which is basically the same as taking someone and throwing them on the street in our world and making sure that they can never again be anything but a street person. It's kind of weird and kind of warped, and that world emerges slowly through the story. The first few pages of the story, our main protagonist, who is Hans Dick, I can't pronounce that, Dijkstra? Yeah, not going well. Okay, Hans, whatever. He comes from some sort of interesting background, Flemish something else. He's described as not being an English first language speaker, which doesn't matter so much in that world, but English is still the majority language. Him and another person called Mustafa Sharif are entering a house illicitly. It's a secret code that Mustafa is somehow getting from somewhere, again illicitly. They're going back in time to residences that have been abandoned or lost and exploring them. Now, one thing I really loved about this book is there used to be a Facebook page called Abandoned Brisbane, where people enter a house to basically record what was there. And at the moment there's YouTubers all over the world. One of my favorites is actually in Adelaide, Australia, who go in to record the details of buildings before they're demolished, which is what happens to beautiful old buildings that are standing in the way of people earning money. I got a very strong vibe of Abandoned Brisbane, or that style of investigation of abandoned buildings. And I also got the same sort of vibe for the level of criminality, because these people aren't entering to steal things or to wreck things or to really change anything at all. They're entering. Mustafa Sharif is doing it for reasons that remain anonymous until the end of the book. Hans is doing it because what he says, he wants to record all these details about all these places that will be lost in time, for future people to access that knowledge. He plans to keep all that information in secret that will only be released on his death, and they're both well aware that they're actually committing a crime, but unlike people who investigate abandoned houses today, they're committing one of the worst crimes in their society, which is violating the privacy of the codes. So that's interesting. Those two main protagonists, they're not the only ones by any mean. I've got to say, John Brunner does characters well. Unlikable, unsympathetic characters may well end up being his main forte. But while Hans Dijkstra, probably Dijkstra. There's a D and there's a Y and there's a K. Let's say Dijkstra. Hans Dijkstra starts out as being someone we don't know very well, but I respect what he's trying to do in terms of documenting all this information that will otherwise be lost. Mustafa Sharif is more of a cipher. We don't really know what he wants and we don't see much of him, but both characters develop throughout the book. One thing that this book does that I don't normally like, at the beginning of each chapter, you've got this little poem that's written by Mustafa Sharif. And it turns out that the character of Mustafa Sharif is one of the very wealthy men of the world. he's created what's virtually his own little empire in Upper Nile, I think it is, Egypt. He's blind, but he's collected a huge amount of wealth around him, and he's basically providing a small kingdom where people are given jobs and given positions. He sounds like he's going to be a really humanitarian sort of guy, but throughout the book you're reading him, I personally had my doubts. I always thought there was something weird to him. Is there, isn't there? Even at the end of the book, when you learn more about him and his motivations, he still ends up being a bit of a cipher of a character. And I appreciate that. Hans Dijkstra, who starts out being a normal guy he's got a normal job, he's got a wife, he's a bit abnormal in that way. One of the many viruses that has gone through humanity have reduced the more or less 50-50 gender balance to 3 women to every 5 men. And so women are very sought after. Hans Dijkstra is lucky to have a wife, but his wife doesn't sound particularly nice or particularly likable. He certainly doesn't like her. He's basically got her as what in the 2020s you'd call a trophy bride. She's a woman, he's married to her, that's an incredibly sought after, valuable connection, and that's why he's done it. He doesn't like her, he doesn't respect her. And he certainly doesn't trust her. She doesn't know anything about this hobby of his of going into abandoned houses and recording them. As the novel progresses, our knowledge of Hans Dijkstra increases, and the more you learn about him, the less you like him. He isn't a nasty guy, he isn't a bad guy, but he isn't a moral one. And you find out more and more about him, you like him less and less, and he starts to become more than a little bit unhinged. So while I really enjoyed the first slightly more than half of this book, I thought it was great, around about the last third is when he goes to a party, he meets a different girl, and he kind of goes batshit crazy, to be honest. That last bit of the book was weird, and I couldn't quite get a handle on what Brunner was trying for there. It ended excellently. I really liked the final confrontation between Hans Dijkstra and Mustafa Sharif, and the analysis of humanity. Now, throughout this book, I would say an analysis of humanity is mostly what Brunner is going for. The characters that see you through the book are characters that he's created for the purpose of examining humanity, I think. I can't know his motivations, obviously, but the examination of humanity is very much what these little poems in the front of each book are about. You learn more about Mustafa Sharif through them, which is enough to make you doubtful and suspicious of him, but you also see a lot about the culture, its values, what it wants, and the culture has evolved in some very strange ways. Because of the huge explosion of war that happened as a result of the development of these, what are they called? Skereks? Not skereks. They don't call them doors. I feel they should be called doors. Even that useless Goodreads interview doesn't call it. Step they'd taken from subtropical to Arctic. They took it through a thing. Oh man. I really should make notes before I do reviews, otherwise Skelter, that's it. Skelter as in, I don't know, helter-skelter? Very much, it's spelt the same. So the Skelter is this door that they use. They punch in a code to a certain place, then they go through it and they end up in that place. So when the Skelter first came out, there was no way of keeping the codes anonymous, and anyone who had a Skelter in their house could basically be invaded at any time by any criminal who got the code, and one gets the feeling that you could basically punch in any anonymous code and end up somewhere. So there was a lot of death, destruction, and that lack of anonymity to the Skelter is what they claim led to all these wars and the downfall of civilization, which has been built up and used slightly differently. When ends up doubting that. But we also meet the man who invented the way to keep the codes anonymous. Later in the book, he's one of the small, I think they're described as a group of 10 men and 5 women who are virtually the ruling or the members of humanity or its upper citizens. It's an interesting book. Its commentary on society will definitely keep me thinking for a while. I've got to respect the author a great deal. It's not at all what I expected, but it has been very enjoyable. It's got an interesting dedication as well to Robert Silverberg, who asked for the story and had to take something else when it grew up to be a novel instead of a novella. Maybe it was meant to be included in a collection that did include that door story that I vaguely remember. But this really is about humans and what they do and how they build up their society. It's not a very kindly look at them either. I don't know that John Brunner really liked people all that much, but he does a good job of shining a light onto weirdnesses. So many small things that I could mention here. It's well written. I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the unlikable characters because the last book I read had virtually no characters and I missed them. Hans's obsession with certain things is well described. Aside from right at the end when he does go off the rails, his obsessive nature brings out aspects of humanity, I guess you'd say, in ways that I did enjoy. I think that John Brunner's attempt to create someone from a strange background of Dutch, Flemish, I don't know that it worked in particularly. Apparently early in his career he was criticised by British authors of making his books too Americanized, so he tried to diversify them. I would say this is just basically SFF, and it doesn't really have a location. He brings in characters and sites from all over the world, Sweden, Bali, Malta, everywhere, in a way that is actually, I think, very organic and very interesting, and creates his world building in a very believable way. So I don't think that that's a fair commentary. One incidental thing that I did very much enjoy is that when he's at this party by one of the most powerful and presumably rich men of the world, he gets a plate that includes smoked reindeer, fresh caught cooked fish, and an Asian-style salad. And John Brunner makes a point that in this day and age, it's normal to have food from several different cultures on a single plate. And I'm going, hey, that's 2024. You do. You would absolutely have meals of this kind, and I thought that was funny. He also seems to have a fascination with Australia and New Zealand, and a very brief Google didn't uncover any connection between John Brunner and Australia and New Zealand, but the party is set in New Zealand, and he clearly knows a little bit about Maori white colonisation society and balance, which for the 70s was actually quite interesting, the way he described it. He also earlier on talks about extinctions and extinction events, and he brings up 2 examples. One of them is rabbits and myxomatosis, which has got to relate to Australia. I didn't even know that we brought myxomatosis to Australia that early, but it must relate to the measures that Australian white colonists took to get rid of the rabbit plague, which is myxomatosis. Arguably cruel, very divisive, but what rabbits do to this country is appalling. The other example he gave was what crown of thorns do to coral reefs. And again, that's so Australian topic. Great Barrier Reef, crown of thorns was a huge problem and still exists. It's been reduced a little bit, but the crown of thorns devouring the coral is still a problem that many people are treating ongoing. So I don't know. I think he had some sort of connection to the Australia and New Zealand, and if anyone watching this knows more about John Brunner and would like to recommend a place I can go to read about him a little bit more, I would be curious. And if you happen to know what his connection to Australia and New Zealand is, because I'm pretty sure there is one, I'd like to know that as well. Yeah, so a really interesting book, entirely not what I was expecting. It's a small book, but it wasn't a particularly fast read. It took me a couple of days, 142 pages. And the afterword is yet another poem by Mustafa Sharif. It's very richly written. For a small book, it's unexpected in terms of social complexity, unexpected in terms of non-linear plot, and I love the descriptions from all over the world. So yes, thumbs up to John Brunner. On first read, 3 stars out of 5. This is one I probably will reread, and maybe just in a couple of years. Thank you very much for watching yet another review of science fiction and fantasy. And like, comment, subscribe, all that sort of thing. But more importantly, go away and read good books, because that's how the world gets better.